So our next speaker is going to be DanielD.Beck, and DanielD.Beck has written a Twitter bot to sort of monitor the sun and the how NASA tracks what the sun looks like, the corona, and he has one that like turns it all into animated GIFs, which I think is really cool. Additionally, he lives in Cambridge, though he is American, Cambridge, England, though he's American. So he's an American in Cambridge, and that sounds like somebody should write that book.
I would like you to imagine for just a moment that you're not here in the Crystal Ballroom where there's a fun, bouncy dance floor, and that you're at work. I'm sorry. Just wait, bear with me for one moment. And you're at work, and maybe you're a designer, and you're working with a new design using an unfamiliar CSS framework, or you're a writer, and you're documenting a new product with a static site generator, or you're a developer, and you're writing a new Python library. And you've been working on it for a few days, and things are going well. You don't necessarily know all the answers to every question about this project, but you're confident about where you're going and what you're going to do next. But then your boss drops by your desk, or you get a message on Slack, and they say, "Can I have 5 minutes of your time?" And you think, "Oh, sure, I can spare 5 minutes. I'll get back to this in 5 minutes. No big deal." And 5 minutes is never just 5 minutes. And 5 minutes becomes an hour, and an hour becomes tomorrow, and then tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes next month, and the better part of a year goes by before you get back to this project. And when you open the directory of files and you look at them, it's all strange. This once familiar thing has become a foreign land. And so maybe you started a README, but it looks something like this. A simple, easy to consume, self-wrapping, blah, blah, object for collection, blah, 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 blah. And it just doesn't mean anything to you anymore. Or maybe you didn't get to that point of your to-do list. You didn't have the time to write that README file, or it just didn't occur to you yet. And so now you have a little bit of anxiety about this project. Maybe you procrastinate a little bit. You find something else to work on, something that is a little more familiar and easy to wrap your head around. Or maybe you throw in the towel and you say, nobody has time to be a software archaeologist, and I'm just going to start over from scratch. Or maybe you thrash and panic, and you run half-remembered commands and open random files in the hopes that something will unlock the memory about this project. Now, wouldn't it be nice to have the confidence back that we had earlier? Wouldn't it be nice to transplant confidence from the past into the future, or from one person to another? And I think we can write a README that can do that. And so today I'm going to talk to you about why I think that's true and give you a realistic method for getting it done. I'm a technical writer. I write documentation a lot for developers and sysadmins. And so basically I'm writing a lot of deployment documentation. And as a result, I've read a lot of READMEs, particularly for open source projects, but not exclusively. And over time, I got into the habit of thinking of those READMEs as, they're not going to help me, that they're not going to do me any favors. And so late last year, I decided maybe I should doubt my judgment about this a little more. Maybe I'm just looking at the wrong things. So I decided to systematically research the README file. I made a list of README files that I wanted to read. It included open source projects that I was familiar with, the handful of closed source READMEs that I had access to, and then every README on GitHub with 10,000 or more stars. So, reasonably popular README files. And I set out to read each of these. And so, admittedly, this is a biased sample. There's a tendency towards these to be READMEs for established, visible projects. But I read over 200 READMEs. Just those on GitHub, that list now is 230 READMEs. And I asked some questions about each one. So first, I looked at the context of the README file. What kind of project is this? Is this a JavaScript or Python project? Maybe it's CSS. Maybe it's a README-only project. There's a really neat phenomena about on GitHub of people putting repositories up that contain only a README file, just to share some information. And GitHub will give you nice stats about this stuff too. It'll say, this is 80% JavaScript and it's 20% HTML or something like that. Then I looked at what other files came with the README. These all caps files like authors, license, contributing. And I wanted to know what else the maintainers thought was important to go with the README. And then I looked at kind of what was the file made out of. Was it written with Markdown or restructured text, or was it plain text? I wanted to know how the author composed the file. Next, I looked at the content. I asked what topics were covered. This was a very pass-fail assessment. If you made an attempt to do something, I wrote it down and gave you credit. So if you said this is a Python library, that counted as a description. Then I looked at what other files or documents did the README link to? What other things were considered important by the author for the audience of the README to know about in addition to the README itself? And then I looked at kind of what did the file look like visually, what logos and badges and screenshots. I got really excited when I saw animated GIFs. And so I wanted to know what visual impression was trying to be made here. And then finally I asked myself some questions. I asked what was good about this, what stood out to me as being particularly effective, and what was bad about this, what stood out to me as maybe not succeeding or not being helpful. And then I asked, what is my subjective experience of the README? What effect did it have on me as a reader? And so I asked all these questions, and this is what I learned. First, the bad news. README quality varies. I thought I knew what a bad README was going to look like, and I was disappointed. Some READMEs were almost openly hostile to the reader. They said, go away, don't read this. Second, I found there are very few conventions. There's little agreement about what is important to have in a README. And third, I found that READMEs routinely omit information. And sometimes that information was essential. So here's some examples. Almost 1 in 5 READMEs don't want you to know the project's name. It wasn't in the first heading or paragraph. If I couldn't easily skim and find the project's name in the file, I didn't count it. Though there's a caveat here, which is some of the files had them in images, had the name of the project in images, which is cool when you've converted your Markdown to a web page and you get that look. But if you're looking at it in a plain text editor or you're using a screen reader, I felt like that didn't really count. Almost a third of READMEs don't want you to know what the project is. They made no attempt to describe the project at all. They didn't describe what it does or its potential use cases. It just covered other things. Almost half of READMEs don't want you to know where to find the project. They don't have a project's homepage or URL. For Git repositories, I thought this was particularly disturbing because Git is distributed version control. It's software that doesn't dictate, it doesn't say this is the official thing. It just, each repository is its own island, and so it's very easy for your project to become decontextualized. And so I thought it was kind of strange that these READMEs didn't make a statement about what was the official version. Now there's some good news. README quality varies. You can learn a lot from reading READMEs. I found that even kind of overall average README files had clever solutions to their specific problems. And there are very few conventions. We don't have to worry about breaking reader expectations. And READMEs are missing information. I found that comprehensive READMEs were functionally equivalent to the short perfunctory READMEs. That when you answer every single question, or you answer no questions, it was sort of the same situation because you can't find what you're looking for. Doing this research, I found that READMEs are a special document. They are in a privileged place in the top directory of a project. They're not buried in some subdirectory of a subdirectory. And they're in all caps. They're shouting README. And it's a little desperate sounding, but it works. And they're this flagship file. Other files get the all caps treatment, but README is the one we really look to first. The oldest README I found was from 1974. So we have 40 years of experience collectively, not me personally, looking to the README file and asking, tell me what you know. It's also special because we don't need special tools to read them. Unless you're doing something awful with PDFs, the plain text editor will do the trick. Or you can If you're on the command line, you can cat readme.txt, and you'll get something useful. But tools like GitHub and Bitbucket and GitLab are elevating the README. These tools have decided, the authors of these tools have decided that the README is going to be the most visible file, that this is the one they're going to show you first. And they make the README files look really good. They take your restructured text and they turn it into HTML with nice typography that you actually might want to look at. And you get this free web presence for having written a README file. That once you check in the README file, you now have a web page that you can link to and say, this is where my project lives. And so it's this big opportunity to shine. But overall, this is what a typical README looks like. It's a markdown file that contains a short, jargon-filled description of the project, followed by a seemingly random selection of topics, such as feature lists, installation instructions, configuration and settings, dependencies, example usage, social media links, authors, sponsorship, patents, copyright, badges, computer programming, TV VCR repair, or get your degree. Now, no matter what topics are covered, even if they didn't cover each of those, that long list of potential topics, I found that the best READMEs gave me confidence about the project, even when they didn't have all the answers to every question. And I found that READMEs that build the reader's confidence do 4 key things. First, they help the reader identify the project. So, what is it called? Who made it? Why does it exist? Where do I find it again? Second, they help you evaluate the project. Who's it for? Who does it help? Where did it come from? And third, they help you use the project one time. They didn't necessarily exercise every possible feature, but they proved that it worked. And fourth, they help the reader engage with the project, to direct them to documentation or contributing or the community of users or developers. So 4 tasks. It's not a lot, but we do need to write something down. There are a lot of templates out there that will help you write a README file, and there are style guides that'll do the same. And they're great, and you should take advantage of them, especially those that pertain to maybe your community, your programming language, or your problem space. But I want to caution you that templates lie. That templates imply that your work's not finished until you've filled in every blank. And that every blank is a question, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the answer or that you need the answer to each question. And that the order of the template is not necessarily the order that you'll write it. And so instead, I think it's helpful to flip that process around. Well, I've written you a checklist. So you can find this at github.com/DanielD.Beck/readme checklist. And if you want, you can stop taking notes at this point. I'm going to kind of basically cover what's in the checklist. But it's intended to be quick and compatible with templates and extendable. So the idea is you'll write a README quickly so that it doesn't fall down the to-do list too far, and that you can use a template that you like, and that you can add on to it. So it doesn't cover every topic. You might put other things in your README. I trust you. If there's an audience anywhere that's going to be judicious about what to put in their README, it's in this room. But the checklist helps make sure you got the essentials to building reader confidence, and it follows the 4 components I mentioned before. So first, we help the reader identify the project. So once you've made your readme.txt, this is the easiest part. First, you name the project. You give the project's address. It's 2016. You need a URL. And then you take ownership. You say, this is who this belongs to. When you confidently say, I made this, that is contagious. That transfers to the reader. Next, you help the reader evaluate the project. This is the hardest part. We need to answer the question, how does the project help the reader? So tell me about what it does, not what it's made out of, the tasks it can be used to complete it, or not the technologies that it uses to do those tasks, or the advantages of the project, not the algorithms it uses. This is the hardest part, and I think you can make it easier by giving yourself constraints. So this is my fake example earlier. A simple, easy-to-consume, self-wrapping parthenocarpic object for collection from back-8 pseudotrees with support for automatic color shifting consumability status indication. It's This is to reflect the style of many a README. And this is a pathological case. It's not even a complete sentence. There's nothing there. And it's not even about software, but it's about something you're probably familiar with, but you would never know it. And I don't know if it's pride or insecurity, but something drives authors to just unload this big bag of nouns and adjectives. And I think it's a pattern that's trying to be clever. And I want you to reject clever. And instead, I think we should be a little robotic. So have you ever played a phrasal template word game? I'm sorry, I meant Mad Libs. So if you're not familiar with Mad Libs, it's a game where you're asked to basically provide a list of parts of speech. So a noun, a verb, an adjective. And then you fill those words that you selected for those parts of speech into the blank spaces in a story. And it's fun and it's funny. And so I think we should kind of model after this. And so instead of trying to do anything ourselves, let's just fill in the blanks. So with project, you can verb noun. Project helps you verb noun. Unlike alternative, project verbs noun. The checklist has a bunch more of these and a little more detail to kind of fill them out. But you can also make your own. So if you come across a paragraph or a sentence structure you really like, it's probably not bolted down. You can strip out the parts that aren't about your thing and make it relevant to you. So here's how I've rewritten the previous example. With banana, you can have a snack. You'll like banana because banana turns yellow when you can eat it. Banana is better than orange because you can open it without a knife. Unlike peach, banana doesn't have a pit. It was about a banana the entire time. I wrote about the banana in the cruelest way I could come up with. But instead, and so this slide doesn't say anything new. Everything that was in the previous slide is here. It's just that I think it's safe to say that this is more useful. We can make a decision about this, right? We can decide what to eat. It's not as cool. It doesn't sound nearly as nerdy and technical, but I think it's more useful. Now you can still open your big bag of nouns if you want to, but I want you to wait till after you've done this. If you don't find this approach appealing, the checklist has a few more strategies. So you can maybe tell your project's origin story, how you had a problem and you tried a solution and it failed, and then you had an idea and now you have what's before us. Or you might invert the message and you might tell me what your project's not good for, or when other tools might be better. It's not a README file, but I really love the SQLite document that tells you when not to use their project. I think it's my favorite database just for that, just for telling me when I'm making a bad decision. Under the evaluate heading, there's another important question, which is who can use the project. For open source projects, this means to tell me what the license gives and takes. So if you need help with this, I think you should check out the Creative Commons license descriptions. They do nice little summaries that say, you are free to ABC under the terms XYZ. So you're free to share and remix, but you have to give attribution. For closed source projects, you need to describe the limitations generally, though you have a lot more flexibility about kind of how you're going to talk about this stuff. So if you have a project that's for internal use only, say big corp internal use only. And that's kind of something you need to talk about. Next, tell the reader what they need to know to show that your project works as expected. So first, establish prerequisites. Do I need to have Python installed? If so, what version? You're not Carl Sagan. You don't have to invent the universe. But if you're going to give me an apple pie recipe, I need to know what the ingredients are. Then go through your installation steps and show off running your project one time. This is a recipe to get from your directory full of files to hello world, whatever hello world means for your project. So if you have a programming language, that's going to be literally installing it and running hello world. But if you're writing a book, it might be a preface. It might be how to read this book. It might help to think of this more as demonstration than documentation. So once you've made your point, once you've shown that it works, you stop. If you give someone a recipe, you don't give them every variation on that recipe. You just give them the first attempt. And then after you've written this part, test it from scratch. This is going to be the single most time-consuming part of the process. But I think it's also the most rewarding. You're inevitably going to find ways to improve the first encounter with your project. If you've gotten your reader this far, now you're free to bombard them with more information. So linking to documentation is good enough. It's nice. But if you want bonus points, then summarize what's in those links. So saying, here's the API docs is nice, but instead saying, the API docs will show you how to do X, Y, Z is even nicer. If you're using a documentation generator, you should think of that as a project within a project. Dealing with documentation generators isn't sort of an easy, natural thing, and so you should have a separate README file just for that. Then talk about contributions. Maybe you want bug reports or pull requests. How should that happen? If you're not doing open source, this is really an opportunity to be clear about the relationship you want with your users. So if you've made a portfolio piece, maybe you don't want feature requests, but you would love to hear bug reports. And this is an opportunity to talk about that relationship. If you are doing open source, Nadia Ekbal has written a great contributors guide template for you. For community projects, this is perhaps as important as your README file, and I think it's worth your attention. My original outline was going to talk in more detail about this, but this template and kind of accompanying checklist is way better, and so you should read this. She did some similar research on contributing guides, and it's part README, or sorry, part template and part checklist, and I think it's got some really good material in there about style and voice that I haven't gotten into at all, and I think it's a really valuable resource, so you should check this out. Finally, and most importantly, tell me where to find the project's people. So if you have mailing lists or issue trackers, IRC channels, Slack groups, I want to know where you're congregating, where you're getting together. Don't hide behind your project, stand behind it. Because at the end of the day, your project and your README is made by and for other people. And so that brings us to the final step. So read over your README one more time. Check that the reader can identify the project. Check that the reader can evaluate the project. Check that the reader can use the project. And check that the reader can engage with the project. And then imagine it's 6 months in the future, and you're seeing your README with fresh eyes. And then I want you to ask yourself, do you feel confident? So, thank you. For links, notes, and slides, you can go to these URLs, and I'll be happy to take.